It's one of the most acclaimed runs in recent Marvel Comics history, but can Al Ewing's The Immortal Hulk live up to the hype? Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Al Ewing and illustrated primarily by Joe Bennett, the first issue of The Immortal Hulk was published by Marvel Comics in June of 2018, with the 50th and final issue being released in October of 2021. And the Hulk is back from the dead, but with the line between Bruce Banner and the Green Monster growing thinner, the horror that lies between their split will be harsher than ever. And if you throw in Joe Fixit, the Professor, the Gladiator, and all the other personalities that he's had over the years, the possibility of ever seeing Bruce again seems grim. But what happens when he's forced to confront the damage that he's caused along the way? And what if his path to redemption leads him directly to hell itself? The art. Okay, so to start off, I do have to mention that Joe Bennett does have a few controversies under his belt, one of which even involved the Immortal Hulk, and I don't think I'm nearly intelligent enough to really start to tackle the kind of topics that it's involving. But long story short, he doesn't sound like a great guy, and Al Ewing's already began to distance himself from the artist, and honestly, I don't really think there was much special about his style. And admittedly, whoever was going to be the artist on this book started at a massive disadvantage because of those absolutely beautiful Alex Ross covers. Holy fuck, talk about showing someone up. Credit to Bennett, if I heard that I was the person whose art was waiting behind 50 issues of Alex Ross's covers, I probably would have just quit. And the best thing is that the covers actually had a meaning to the issue itself. Sometimes, and especially with Ross, you think it's just going to be a striking image that doesn't really have a lot of relevance to the issue that's inside. But it was great because if you saw the Avengers on a cover, then they were going to be in the issue. But Bennett's style really hit its stride when it came to the horror, and especially the body horror stuff, which very much reminded me of stuff like John Carpenter's The Thing. It was disturbing and unsettling, and especially when you're seeing it happen to a well-established character like the Hulk. He also did a great job of illustrating how monstrous the Hulk is and distinguishing between the different personalities. There were subtle differences in the mannerisms, the posture, and even the design so that you could still know which brain was inside the character. However, overall I was a bit underwhelmed by the interior art. A majority of the great moments in this run I remember because of the shock value or the impact on the story, and not so much because of the way they looked. There were a few instances where it does try to break the mold with the paneling, but it's just not really an impressive style for me. And that's okay because art is subjective. There's been artists on this channel that I've raved about that people have just straight up told me I'm wrong. Like it's going to be that easy to just change my eyes. But it's just one of those styles that does its job, it tells a story, but it never really feels like it's trying to work overtime. And there was one issue early on where the story followed the perspectives of a few different characters, and each of those stories had a different artist to represent the life of that person, and I thought that was really inventive, and I did enjoy it, and I thought it was one of the standout issues looking at it from an art perspective, and I wouldn't have complained too much if they would have done that a few more times throughout the series. And one thing that I noticed happening which threw me out of the book on a few occasions was just the faces looking off. I get that they were going for a horror vibe, but I didn't think they'd be doing that with the pedestrian characters. I don't know if it was something to do with the pencils, the shading, the colouring, but there was a few occasions where it looked like a character was missing a nose, or it just looked like stuff had been rubbed out and they forgot to fill it back in. If it would have been one of the monstrous characters, I probably would have let it slide and think that this was intentional, but I can't really see it being intentional for the human characters. If nothing else, so Benny is consistent. I didn't notice much of a drop in quality from the first issue to the last, which does really help move the plot forward, and I reckon that will be an advantage to people who want to read this in one go now that the series is finished, and especially because it's getting that upcoming omnibus, which you can already order from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Jumping into the story section now, and I can't remember the last time a Marvel title had this much hype and praise. It was probably something like Tom King's Vision, which is coincidental because I'm reading that at the moment. Yep, the review's coming soon, so make sure you're subscribed. And for the first 20 or so issues of The Immortal Hulk, the hype was real. I've read quite a few Hulk series now and I've always enjoyed them, and I'm even somebody who's an apologies for the Jeff Loeb run. But Ewing's take felt like it was trying to be something different from everything that's come before it. Sure, yeah, we've had a few writers that have tried to look into the psyche of Bruce Banner and the other alter egos that he's had, but I got the sense early on that Al Ewing was trying to give a linear answer to all of that. So I like that early on this had a sense of direction and almost like a thesis. And it got me excited that this was going to be a longer run, and I thought it was going to be one of those series that I didn't want it to end. Coupled with that was a fantastic tone. This wanted to be a horror book, and it succeeded, especially in the first issue. Just following characters that knew that the Hulk was nearby and he might attack soon gave me that impression that I needed to be looking over my shoulder, which became a bit redundant. And the thing is, I've noticed there's two types of tones when it comes to Hulk stories. You've got the type that suits that sad song that plays at the end of the Lou Ferrigno series, and then you've got ones that are more in line with Hulk Ultimate Destruction. And overall, from the darker tone, it is clear that it's the former, but I liked that it felt like a perfect mix between both at first. Because Hulk was just on a rampage, he didn't really show a lot of reluctance towards hurting anyone, but you knew that there was something deeper going on underneath. And that was something that I particularly loved early on, that he put that focus on the Hulk's kills and the destruction that he leaves in his wake. And it toes that delicate balance because the Hulk is attacking the right people, but it's the collateral damage that he's forced to face. The duality between Banner and the Hulk is a real strength as well, and something that's really at the core of this story for the most part. The longer that the run goes on, it does incorporate more of those personas that he's had over the years, so although early on this is a great starting point for this character, so much so that I did include it in my Where to Start the Hulk, in some of the later issues I did have to do a cheeky Google search of some of the personas so that I could catch up on the history because it'd been quite a few years since I'd heard of them, and at least it did give an additional layer to the mystery, that element of not knowing who might appear next. The problem is it's hard to do horror or mystery for a while without needing to either change the direction, move the goalpost, or lose what makes it special to begin with, because it's difficult to make us constantly fear the Hulk if we're following him for a while. But at the same time, you can't make a Hulk book that's trying to explore who he is as a character without putting him as the focus. And I think that's why I tried so many different things in the beginning and then just kept doing the same thing throughout the rest of the run, but with less of an impact. And honestly, despite what I was hoping for early on, this could have been near perfect if it was only about 20 or so issues. It could have kept the tension, developed the characters in pretty much the way that it did anyway, and then just end the series on a high before it went on for too long. But once Ewing had begun to settle in, there was a very clear rhythm to the plot of each story arc. A character would be introduced, sometimes it'd be good, sometimes it'd be bad. We'd follow their life for an issue. There would then be an issue that shows the reaction towards that character from the rest of the world. The focal character of the art would then come face to face with the Hulk, and then we'd have an issue in hell and somebody has to try and find the way out. Now, hearing me saying that out loud, that sounds like a really cool plot, and at first this was, which is why I had such a good time with the early experience and I really understood the hype. But just imagine if that exact same plot happens quite a few times in a quick succession. All of a sudden it doesn't really have that wow factor. Sure, yeah, they do move or change one or two of the elements, and at first I thought this was some kind of reference to Groundhog Day, showing what it was really like to be inside the mind of Bruce Banner, and then all of a sudden this monster's just wrecked your entire life in one night, and then just having this revolving door of people showing up and blaming you for something. But I've said this before, and even being called an idiot for it, which is a surprise to absolutely no one, but I will always stand by the fact that an entertaining plot should always have a higher priority over subtext, which is where I think many of my problems with the Immortal Hulk really lie. I'm no stranger to Al Ewing, I really enjoyed his run on Loki. That was one of those books that really caught me by surprise, and I knew going into this it was going to be more of a psychological story than an action-packed one. But it's almost as if Ewing heard the praise that this was getting for being a deep and thinking man's Hulk story, and decided instead to focus only on that. The priority became more about what he wanted to say rather than the story that he wanted to tell, and as a result of that, there were stretches of issues in the second half that just felt like pure filler, with that exact same plot structure that we talked about earlier, and it just felt like it was treading water that we'd already gone over and forcing itself to focus on characters that had already served the purpose. Gamma Flight was a perfect example of that. When they were brought in early on, I enjoyed them. They felt like a unique and interesting challenge for the Hulk to go up against, and brought some comedic relief to the often melodramatic tone. But then they kind of just stayed in the book and only really had a few memorable moments after the opening arc. Another one, you had the reporter Jackie, at least I think that's what her name was. She had a perfect backstory for this series, showing us how the Hulk can destroy lives without us even knowing about it. And that spurred on her desire to go into journalism, which gave us this really unique lens to start the book with. And then she kind of just waited around after her initial interactions with the Hulk. And that also felt the same with Betty Ross. I was hyped when she entered this book, they gave her a great development early on, and then she just kind of hovered around until the plot needed her again. I actually kept forgetting that she'd been in this series. And if Ewing had been willing to leave stuff behind and not feeling the need to carry everything with him until the end of the series, there probably could have been a lot more meaning and impactful moments. But instead what we get is an ambitious series that just has a lot of fluff in it. That's not to say that all the characters are bad. I love Sasha Sasquatch, Doc Samson, and the duality between them, and also how that mirror between Bruce Banner, Hulk, and all of his personas. Puck was probably my favourite part of Gamma Flight, and I hope that he appears in more series. Zenmu, or however you pronounce his name, was fun, even if the example of the repetitive storyline was one that he was very heavily guilty of. And to be a hypocrite, I loved his arc because it was before I noticed that pattern, and it shows it is a good formula to use, just not if you're going to use it constantly. And I think that's what really irks me. There's a lot of greatness throughout this run, and even some moments in the second half. It doesn't completely drive off a cliff. It's not like Robert Kirkman's Outcast, where I feel like he just forgot what story he wanted to tell halfway through and then just hit the keyboard and hope for the best. But for example, one of my favourite issues came quite late on, and it followed a security guard that was working for Roxxon. There was this Hulk gang that had been forming in the background, and he didn't know how far to take his job or the impact that it'd have on his life. And it was another great example of showing the wider world being impacted by the Hulk. But at the same time, he didn't feel the need to keep the security guard hanging around in case he needed him in the last issue. They told the exact story that they needed with him and then just left him behind. And I just wish that the second half of this story had more gems like that. Perhaps the difference is that the second half does decide to put the horror aspect on the back burner, and it becomes more sci-fi focused in parts as well. Weirdly, none of them ever feel out of place. They just never reach the same highs that the horror did. Like at one point, there was a massive corporate espionage storyline that was going on that was really fun to follow, even if again, it did kind of relegate the Hulk to the background. So I'm kind of torn between enjoying some of the stuff that the latter half did, but not really in a Hulk book that started out as something different. Maybe if they just rebranded this as something else, I wouldn't really have as many criticisms. But that's not the case, and I can only judge the book that I read. There was also some great inclusions of wider Marvel characters and also lesser known Hulk figures. The Avengers feature in a few issues, and they pretty much just do the same thing every time they appear, which I can't lie is fun, but again, repetitive. Kinda like the majority of what I'm saying in this video. There was also a fantastic issue with The Thing, and I really loved the bond that those two characters have, and they gave it time to develop and found a way to connect it to the main story. So what I loved is that Al Ewing clearly knew who the Hulk was. This was a great exploration of his character and the person that he's been for all the years since he first was published. We just felt like Ewing didn't really know the impact they wanted to leave on this character, and I'm struggling to get to the bottom on why I feel so meh about such a highly acclaimed run. And I think it's because it lost that direction that I enjoyed in the beginning, and in the end just felt long for the sake of being long, which yeah, I can't really criticise too heavily on. I have watched some of my videos back. But the Immortal Hulk was never outright bad, and in isolation I enjoyed a lot of the elements that he brought to the table. I just wish it would have been a bit more disciplined with how it utilised them, and be willing to take a few more risks in leaving stuff behind. And the interesting thing is that when I'm hearing the hype that this title has, it mostly seems to be from people who have yet to read this. Sure, I can only give my limited perspective and I've only got one pair of eyes, but I think it's because of the transition of hype between single issue readers and collected editions. If you only read the latter option like myself and you wait for a series to end before you jump into it, then you heard the praise early on and maybe even picked up a hardcover or two, and now it's the wait for the omnibus to be released to finally see what this is all about. And I think it's important to remember that you don't just have to agree with the general consensus. As well, because this is a deeper title, you run the risk of being labelled an idiot if you don't enjoy it like everybody else already has. It reminds me of how everybody had to get the message of Joker, which isn't difficult at all because the main character wrote it on a notepad so that the audience could read it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the hype now seems to be more from people who are just waiting for the omnibus, rather than people who have already finished off this series and know exactly what waits for them at the end. And if that's you, that's fine. That's how I chose to read this run, but all I'm saying is don't go into this expecting some kind of 11 out of 10 series, because it isn't possible. And if you do adjust your expectations and know that it does change gear in the second half, then I think you can still have an enjoyable experience. Because I think if this was something that I hadn't heard everybody's feedback on already, I probably would have really enjoyed this. And it does feature a majority of his enemies and his allies, and it tries to do a few interesting things. It's just a shame because I think the hype really ruined this for me, and I don't want the same thing to happen to anybody else. This is my final verdict. And if I had a quid for every time that hype negatively impacted something that I was looking forward to, I could probably afford my electricity bill this month without needing to borrow money from my parents. The Immortal Hulk is one of those titles that's always had unanimous praise following it from its very first issue, and it's not completely undeserved, but it couldn't maintain its momentum all the way to the finish line. Al Ewing takes Bruce Banner and the majority of his personas on a journey that few writers have attempted before him, and he mostly succeeds. What started as a great horror comic looking at the collateral damage left in the wake of Banner, and an existential crisis for everybody's favourite gamma-laced hero lost its way somewhere around the halfway mark and seemed to forget what made it special. There are still a handful of great moments, but it just never seems to reach the same highs that it consistently did in the first 20 or so issues. But despite my criticisms, I do still think this is worth checking out, if nothing else for the great first half alone. But just know that it is very front-loaded, and after the body horror stuff leaves the series, the art isn't really anything to write home about. Maybe this will be one of those series that I come back to a few years down the line with adjusted expectations, but all things considered, I'm gonna have to go against the grain with the Immortal Hulk and give it a very modest and probably surprising score of 60%. Woof woof. So that's the video, hopefully you enjoyed it, but until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof. See you at the next video.